January 18th, 2003, 11:47 p.m. The town of Iron River, Michigan slept beneath a heavy quilt of snow. Streetlights glowed faintly through drifting flakes, their halos trembling in the frozen night. Wind curled between houses, rattling old shutters, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke. At the edge of town, a car idled quietly, its exhaust puffing white clouds into the bitter air like a slow, exhausted breath. Inside, the heater whined, fogging the glass. Outside, silence pressed in. The roads were empty, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, as if the night itself was holding its breath. A woman stepped out. Her boots crunched against the hard snow, leaving deep, defined impressions that trailed toward the woods. Her coat was pulled tight, collar high against the cold, her hair whipping under the sharp January wind. She moved quickly, almost too quickly, as though someone or something were just a step behind her. For a moment the only sounds were her hurried footsteps and the low drone of the idling engine. Then, nothing. Her footprints stretched across the powder-white road, neat and unbroken. But halfway across they simply stopped. No scuffle, no drag marks, no blood, just a clean trail ending in the middle of nowhere. Minutes passed. The engine sputtered, then cut off, swallowed by the silence. Darkness deepened around the car, its windows frosting over until it looked abandoned, like a forgotten relic. The world outside lay undisturbed, except for those footprints that led nowhere. Somewhere a dog barked once, then fell silent. A single streetlight flickered, its light shivering across the snow like a warning. Time ticked forward, but no one would know for hours that a life had vanished into the cold. The night sky stretched indifferent above. The moon hung pale, casting long shadows that reached toward the spot where the tracks disappeared. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed her whole. For 20 years the story would haunt this town. The unanswered question would linger, whispered in diners and remembered on anniversaries. Where did she go? How could someone vanish from the middle of a road on a frozen January night? The last trace of her existence was imprinted in the snow, and then nothing. Her family would wait. Detectives would chase shadows. Neighbors would speculate. But on that first night all that remained was silence, frost, and footprints that stopped too soon. For 2 decades, no one knew where she went next. Iron River, Michigan was the kind of place people drove through without ever stopping. A town of fewer than 3,000. It sat tucked into the Upper Peninsula, surrounded by forests that seemed endless in winter and lakes that froze over into sheets of pale glass. Life here moved slowly, marked by church bells on Sundays, high school football on Fridays, and the quiet rhythm of factory shifts. Downtown was a stretch of aging brick storefronts, hardware store, diner, post office, where neon signs buzzed faintly in frosted windows. Everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Strangers were rare. Gossip traveled faster than the snowplows that cut through icy streets. And in the middle of this small-town circle was her. 20-year-old Katie Jensen had been the kind of girl people remembered with an easy smile. She had auburn hair that caught the light, a laugh that carried across a room, and a warmth that made her popular even with those she barely knew. She worked part-time at the local grocery, stocking shelves and ringing up neighbors, but she dreamed of more, moving downstate, maybe college, maybe nursing. For now she was rooted in Iron River, where family kept her close and friends kept her busy. Her yearbook painted her as most likely to brighten your day. Teachers remembered her as dependable, though shy at first glance. Friends remembered her love for old country songs, long winter drives, and scribbling poetry in notebooks she never let anyone read. She wasn't rebellious, but she had edges, fierce when challenged, unwilling to be dismissed. Yet small towns often hold vulnerabilities like secrets. Katie's kindness sometimes drew the wrong people in. She trusted too easily. She brushed off comments that should have worried her. More than once her mother had warned, "Don't walk alone at night. Not everyone here is as good as they seem. Zifties kommt has dol per eds." Still, Katie lived her life as though nothing bad could touch her. She attended local gatherings, played darts at the tavern, rode along with friends on late-night drives, ordinary rituals in an ordinary place. The town itself, though, carried an undercurrent. Winters in Iron River were long, isolating and cold, snow sealing in houses, cutting off roads, making people look inward. Cabin fever mixed with whispers. Neighbors glanced at each other with suspicion when trouble came. For a young woman like Katie, the safety net was fragile. Everyone thought they knew her story, but they didn't know how quickly it could be rewritten. Her disappearance would pierce the illusion of security that wrapped around Iron River. A girl who represented the heart of the community, gone without reason. And as police dug into her past, neighbors began to ask themselves uncomfortable questions. Because in Iron River, everyone knew your face, but that didn't mean they knew your truth. The night of January 18th began like so many others. A Saturday, bitterly cold, the kind of winter evening when most people stayed indoors, huddled around televisions or wood stoves. But Katie Jensen was 20, restless, and not ready to spend the night in silence. Earlier that evening, she'd gathered with friends at a small house near the edge of town. Music spilled from cheap speakers. Laughter tangled with the sound of boots stomping snow from the doorstep. Inside, the living room glowed yellow beneath low lamps, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and the sharp scent of beer. It wasn't a wild party, just a handful of young people escaping the monotony of a frozen weekend. Katie had arrived in her favorite brown coat, her cheeks red from the cold. Friends remembered her chatting easily, playing cards at the kitchen table, leaning against the counter as though she had nowhere else to be. But beneath the warmth, there were flickers of tension, a quiet disagreement whispered in the hallway, a phone call she stepped outside to take, pacing in the snow with her gloved hand pressed tight to her ear. No one could hear her words, but when she came back inside, she seemed distracted. By 11 p.m. the night began to thin out. Some guests left early, citing work in the morning. Others lingered, reluctant to brave the icy roads. Katie, though, decided it was time to go. She hugged a friend at the door, promised to call tomorrow, and stepped back into the bitter wind. CCTV footage from a nearby gas station caught her car at 11:23 p.m., its headlights carving through the empty streets, the timestamp blinking across the grainy black and white screen. She never stopped for gas. She never stepped inside. The footage simply showed her passing by, the last moving image ever captured of her alive. At 11:41 p.m., she placed one final phone call. Records showed it went unanswered. The person on the other end would later tell police they heard the phone buzz once, then stop. Katie never left a message. By 11:47 p.m., her car was found idling on a narrow road outside town, the door left slightly ajar, the heater humming, her purse and phone still inside. And Katie herself gone. Detectives would later reconstruct these final hours again and again, trying to find the missing piece. Was she followed? Did she agree to meet someone, or did chance deliver her into the wrong path at the wrong time? For the friends who had last seen her, the questions became unbearable. One moment she had been laughing in their kitchen. The next her presence was only a memory, frozen into a grainy timestamp and the silence of an abandoned car. And then silence. The call came just after midnight. A passing driver had spotted the idling car, its headlights dim against the snow, and phoned police. Within minutes, patrol units rolled up the narrow road, their tires crunching over ice. Officers expected perhaps a stranded motorist, maybe a drunk driver who had wandered off. Instead, they found a car that seemed to breathe uneasily in the cold, engine still running, door ajar, heat fogging the windshield. Katie Jensen's purse sat on the passenger seat. Her cell phone lay inside, silent. Her gloves too, no signs of a struggle. No footprints beyond the short trail that ended abruptly in the snow. The first hours blurred into frantic activity, calls to dispatch, flashlights sweeping across the frozen fields, officers shouting her name into the black woods, their voices echoing back unanswered. Dogs were brought in before dawn, noses pressed low to the ice. The trail was sharp, distinct, and then gone, The animals circled in confusion, unable to follow what had simply stopped. By morning, Katie's family arrived at the scene. Her mother clutched at officers, demanding answers they didn't have. Her father stood stiff, silent, as though holding his body together with sheer will. Siblings cried out into the frigid air. The family's desperation collided with the detective's calm caution, two worlds moving at different speeds. Inside the station, investigators began the clock. They knew the first 48 hours were everything. Interviews started immediately. Friends from the gathering, ex-boyfriends, anyone who had seen her that night. Each detail mattered. Who argued with her? Who called her phone? Who lingered too long at the party? Meanwhile, the town awoke to the news. Local radio announced a missing young woman. Flyers with Katie's photo were printed overnight and taped to storefronts by morning. Volunteers gathered, trudging through knee-deep snow with sticks and lanterns, combing ditches and trails. Helicopters scanned the frozen canopy. Every hour without her felt heavier. Police briefings grew clipped, tense. A press conference was held outside the county courthouse. "We are doing everything we can. We urge anyone with information to come forward." Cameras flashed. Behind the microphones, detectives avoided making promises they couldn't keep. Yet the landscape gave nothing back. Every lead ended in more snow. No body, no blood, no sign of where Katie had gone. And as the hours ticked into days, one chilling realization began to sink in. If answers didn't come soon, they might never come at all. By the third day, Iron River no longer felt like the same quiet town. What had once been ordinary neighbors greeting each other at the diner, parents chatting in the grocery aisle, was replaced with hushed voices and sidelong glances. Fear had crept in, silent and contagious. At the local tavern, men nursed beers with lowered voices. "She must have known him," one said. "No one just disappears." At the post office, a woman whispered to another, "I saw a strange truck that night." Rumors multiplied, twisting facts into suspicions. Every sighting became a theory. Every face became a possibility. False leads sprouted from the chatter. Someone claimed they spotted Katie at a gas station 2 towns over. Another swore she had been seen walking into the woods at dawn. Each tip sent officers chasing shadows, burning hours they could not afford to waste. And with every fruitless search, the whispers grew darker. Behind closed doors, neighbors questioned each other. Could it have been someone local? A drifter passing through? Or worse, someone they saw every day? Mothers warned daughters not to walk alone. Doors that once stayed unlocked at night were now bolted shut. The illusion of safety in Iron River was gone. For Katie's friends, the town's speculation was unbearable. They replayed every moment of that night, questioning themselves, wondering if they had missed something. One recalled the argument in the hallway. Another remembered the phone call Katie had stepped outside to take. But the details blurred, warped by fear and guilt. Detectives listened to the rumors too, though carefully. The community's whispers sometimes revealed truths hidden beneath the noise, but more often, they pulled the investigation sideways. As one officer later admitted, "It felt like we were chasing ghosts, because everyone had a story, and none of them matched." The town itself seemed to recoil under the weight of suspicion. Eyes lingered longer. Conversations halted when someone new walked into the room. For the first time, Iron River SIP's closeness became a liability. No one wanted to admit it, but the unspoken thought hung in the air. If Katie hadn't been taken by a stranger, then maybe the danger was one of their own. As the rumors swirled through Iron River, inside the sheriff's office, the mood was very different. For the detectives assigned to Katie Jensen's case, the world narrowed down to paper files, maps, and the relentless pressure of time. The lead investigator, Detective Mark Riley, was in his mid-40s, a veteran of missing person cases, though none quite like this. Colleagues described him as methodical, patient to a fault, but when Katie vanished, something shifted. The case gripped him in a way he couldn't shake. He often repeated the same words to his team: "People don't just disappear. There's always a trail. We just haven't seen it yet." In the first week, The sheriff's office transformed into a war room. Whiteboards lined the walls, filled with names and arrows connecting relationships. A map of Iron River and its outskirts bristled with colored pins marking sightings, interviews, and search zones. Photos of Katie smiled down from every corner, her face becoming an unyielding reminder of what was at stake. Detectives pored over phone records, retracing her last calls. They pulled surveillance footage from every business along the roads she might have traveled. Each grainy clip was studied frame by frame, though none revealed the answer they needed. Sleep became scarce. Riley often stayed long after midnight, slumped in his chair, replaying the timeline aloud until his voice grew hoarse. Others followed his lead, their desks cluttered with cold coffee cups and stacks of handwritten notes. Every interview carried weight. A friend from the gathering insisted Katie had left in good spirits, but another recalled tension that hinted otherwise. An ex-boyfriend denied involvement, though his alibi cracked under questioning. Each inconsistency was written down, cross-checked and filed, feeding the ever-growing board of possibilities. Still, there was a feeling that something remained just out of reach. Riley described it years later. It was like staring at a puzzle with the last piece missing. You knew the image was there, but no matter how long you stared, the gap mocked you. Despite the frustration, the detectives refused to let the trail go cold. Not yet. They expanded searches into frozen marshes, combed abandoned cabins, even questioned hunters who had been out that night. The landscape offered no answers, but their determination only deepened. For Riley, it became personal. Nights at home blurred into nights at the office. He stopped shaving, his eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. His wife recalled him staring at the wall map, as though sheer focus could will the truth into being. Still, the case clung to silence, and each time Riley walked past the evidence board, Katie Sept's smiling yearbook photo seemed to ask him the same question the whole town was asking. Why couldn't they find her? The investigation pushed forward, but the harder detectives chased leads, the quicker they seemed to crumble. Each new tip promised clarity, yet ended in the same place nowhere. The first serious lead came from a drifter spotted at a truck stop outside town. Witnesses recalled a tall man, unshaven, lingering near the pumps around midnight. Someone swore they saw him watching a young woman who resembled Katie. Police tracked him down days later in Wisconsin. Under questioning, he admitted he'd been in Iron River that night, but his receipts and bus ticket proved he'd left before Katie disappeared. Another door closed. Attention shifted to a former boyfriend. His relationship with Katie had been rocky, marked by jealousy and sharp arguments. Friends remembered heated exchanges, even warnings that he didn't want her seeing other people. When detectives pressed him, cracks appeared in his alibi. He claimed to be home alone the night she vanished, but phone records showed movement that didn't match his story. For a moment it seemed the case had found its suspect, but then came the DNA test, and it cleared him completely. The whiteboards filled with faces, acquaintances, co-workers, distant relatives, strangers who had passed through town. Each name was a possibility. Each interview was another attempt to peel back the silence, and each time the evidence slipped away. Anonymous tips poured in through hotlines. One caller claimed Katie had been taken across state lines. Another swore she had been buried in the woods. Police searched. Dogs sniffed. Ground was dug. Nothing. Everyone looks guilty until they don't. One exhausted detective muttered after yet another fruitless lead. Weeks turned into months. The map on the wall grew cluttered, red pins littering the countryside like wounds in the paper. But no pin, no trail, no interview brought them closer to Katie. Frustration gave way to despair. Detectives began to rotate out, reassigned to fresher cases with higher odds. But for Riley, the silence was deafening. He returned to the scene again and again, standing by the roadside where the footprints ended. Snow melted, grass grew, the world moved on. Yet that empty space on the ground still taunted him, as though the earth itself had swallowed the answer. By the end of the first year, the case file was swollen with dead ends. The whispers in town quieted. Media attention faded. The once burning urgency dulled into a cold ache, and with it one chilling truth settled over everyone involved. The case was growing cold. As the seasons turned, the urgency of those first frantic weeks gave way to a slower, heavier silence. By the second anniversary of Katie Jensen's disappearance, Iron River looked much the same. Snow still blanketed the streets each winter, the church bells still tolled on Sundays, but beneath the surface, something had changed. The town had grown accustomed to the absence. For Katie's family, though, the years were merciless. Every holiday was marked by an empty chair at the table. Birthdays passed with candles that were never lit. Her mother kept Katie's room almost untouched. The bed neatly made, the posters still pinned to the walls, the scent of her perfume lingering faintly on a scarf draped over the chair. In interviews, she would speak softly, holding back tears. It's like living with a wound that never closes. Her father grew quieter, working longer hours, his grief folding inward. Siblings spoke of dreams in which Katie appeared, only to wake to the reality that she was still gone. They kept buying cards for birthdays and Christmas, each one carefully written, then tucked into a box labeled "For Katie when she comes home." The box grew heavier with every passing year. Detectives rotated out of the case, their notes added to a file that thickened into a small archive of unanswered questions. Most moved on, not out of neglect, but because fresh crimes demanded their attention. Yet one man refused to let it go. Detective Riley kept the file close, carrying it with him even as new assignments piled on his desk. Colleagues recalled him opening the folder late at night, staring at the photographs, whispering almost to himself, "We're missing something. She's still here, somewhere." Anniversaries brought brief surges of attention. Local news stations ran short features, the smiling yearbook photo, the cold footage of her car, the reminder of footprints that ended too soon. Candlelight vigils flickered outside the courthouse, neighbors clutching each other against the wind. Yet as soon as the cameras left, life in Iron River slipped back into its rhythm, as though grief itself had frozen in place. For Katie's family, that fading spotlight was almost as painful as the loss itself. It felt as if she had vanished twice, once in 2003 and again in the years that followed as memory dimmed and the world forgot to keep asking. Through it all, Riley remained the last tether to hope. His persistence was quiet, almost obsessive. He believed time could be an enemy, but also an ally. Technology was changing. Forensics was advancing. And though the years were cruel, he held on to one conviction. One day the silence would break. 2 decades is a long time for silence to hold. By 2020, the Jensen case file had collected dust in the archives of the sheriff's office, its folders thick with interviews, maps, photographs, and theories that had led nowhere. But time, though merciless, had also brought something else: new tools. In those 20 years, forensic science had evolved dramatically. DNA technology that was once crude and limited had become precise, powerful, and far-reaching. Genetic genealogy, digital photo enhancement, trace evidence testing, all weapons detectives in 2003 could never have imagined. For cases long thought unsolvable, these advances offered new life. It was a young analyst at the State Crime Lab who first reopened the Jensen evidence box. Inside were items collected and preserved with care all those years ago: her coat, her phone, fibers from the car, swabs taken from the scene. At the time, none had yielded anything useful, but now technology could reach deeper. Machines hummed in sterile labs, extracting fragments invisible to the naked eye. DNA too degraded to be tested in 2003 was now mapped with precision. Fibers once dismissed as inconclusive were re-examined under microscopes that revealed patterns never seen before. Even Katie's cell phone, outdated and long dead, held digital imprints that could be resurrected with modern forensics. At the sheriff's office, Riley, now grayer, slower but no less relentless, watched as the evidence came alive again. For years he had fought to keep the file from closing permanently. Now technology was finally on his side. What once was invisible now began to speak. He later recalled, "The first breakthrough came quietly. A partial DNA profile lifted from fibers on Katie's coat. Too faint to identify in 2003, it now revealed itself with clarity. It didn't match family. It didn't match friends. It pointed to someone who had slipped beneath the radar for years. Digital enhancements added another layer. Old grainy surveillance footage, the gas station camera, the traffic light images were processed with modern tools. Blurs sharpened, shapes became clearer. A vehicle seen in the corner of one frame suddenly mattered in a way it hadn't before. Piece by piece, the silence of 2003 began to fracture. Detectives leaned forward with renewed energy, piecing together what had once felt impossible. The cold case was no longer cold, it was burning again, its embers reignited by science and persistence. And in the shadows of those findings, a name began to emerge, a man once interviewed briefly and dismissed, someone who had lived among them unnoticed, someone the town thought they knew. The case had a heartbeat again, and soon the suspect would have a face. The DNA profile was a whisper, not a shout. It didn't scream guilt, it didn't come with a name. But when investigators fed the results into national databases, a distant connection emerged, so faint it might have been overlooked. It wasn't a direct match, it was a relative. Through genetic genealogy, detectives traced family trees, combing through birth records, marriage licenses and obituaries. Branch by branch, the search narrowed. At the end of one line stood a man who had once lived in Iron River, a man who had been interviewed briefly in 2003 and waved away as unimportant. His name was Michael Larson. Larson was the kind of person no one remembered clearly. Neighbors described him as quiet, kept to himself. He'd worked odd jobs, maintenance, trucking, seasonal construction. Nothing that drew attention. He had no violent record, no headline-making trouble. To the world he was invisible. But the more detectives pulled at his life, the more unsettling details surfaced. He had lived just a few blocks from where Katie's car was found. He had abruptly moved out of Iron River the year after she vanished, citing new work opportunities. His history of employment was spotty, short stints, quick exits, and buried in those gaps were stories co-workers who recalled him as controlling, women who described uncomfortable encounters, a pattern of drifting when things got difficult. Detectives reopened his original interview from 2003. At the time, Larson had claimed he was home the night Katie vanished, alone watching television. No one had corroborated it. With little evidence then and hundreds of tips pouring in, investigators let him slide into the background. Now, with DNA and digital records, his name was back in the light. Surveillance footage enhancements revealed something even more chilling. That blurry vehicle seen near the gas station. When sharpened, its make and model aligned with Larson's truck at the time, a beat-up Ford that matched the shadow in the frame. Still, suspicion was not proof. Detectives needed more. They began watching Larson, quietly, carefully. Though older now, he hadn't changed much in habit. He lived alone, worked sporadically, and kept his distance from the community. But surveillance revealed quirks, drives at odd hours, careful routines that suggested a man who didn't like being watched. The more they looked, the more the puzzle pieces fit. Larson wasn't just a face in the crowd anymore. He was the shadow that had lingered over the Jensen case for years, hiding in plain sight. And soon the walls would close in. By now the investigation had transformed from a dormant file into a full-scale operation. Detectives knew Michael Larson was their prime suspect, but knowing wasn't enough. To put him behind bars, they needed undeniable proof, evidence that could withstand every challenge in court. The team devised a plan. If Larson Sipp's DNA truly matched the trace found on Katie Sipp's coat, they had to obtain a fresh sample without alerting him. Directly asking would tip him off, so they turned to one of law enforcement Sipp's oldest tricks, a surreptitious collection. Surveillance units followed him discreetly. Days stretched into weeks. Larson had routines, but they were frustratingly predictable. Home, work, groceries, back home. Detectives waited for a slip, for something he would leave behind. It finally came one evening outside a gas station, when Larson tossed an empty coffee cup into a trash bin. Investigators retrieved it within minutes, sealing it carefully. At the lab, the results came back clear and damning. The DNA from Larson's discarded cup matched the partial profile recovered from Katie's coat. After nearly 2 decades of silence, the link was undeniable. But detectives didn't rush. They needed more. Digital forensics specialists revisited Larson's old phone records, bank statements, and employment history. On the night of Katie's disappearance, his phone had pinged a tower near the road where her car was found, contradicting his claim of being home. Financial records showed he had abruptly stopped showing up for work days after she vanished. His move out of Iron River suddenly looked less like coincidence and more like a calculated escape. Behind the scenes, Riley, the detective who had never let go, watched it all unfold. He had waited years for this moment, but he insisted the case be airtight. "We lived with 20 years of questions," he told his team. "We are not leaving room for one more." A task force was assembled, quietly but decisively. Warrants were prepared. Tactical units reviewed Larson's property, mapping entry points, calculating risk. The arrest had to be flawless. A man who had evaded justice this long could not be given another chance to slip away. In those final days before the operation, the air among the investigators was electric. Some had been children when Katie vanished. Others had grown old chasing shadows. Now they stood on the edge of resolution. The trap was set, and after 2 decades of silence, Michael Larson's world was about to collapse. The morning of the arrest broke grey and heavy over Michigan, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the rooftops. Detectives and tactical officers gathered quietly at a staging area near Michael Larson's home. They moved with a tense precision, rehearsed but aware that after 20 years, there would be no second chances. Larson lived in a modest rental on the edge of town, a truck in the driveway, curtains drawn, no movement inside. At 6:12 a.m., the signal was given. Officers moved in fast, surrounding the house, weapons ready but voices controlled. A pounding knock shattered the silence. "Police! Open the door!" Seconds dragged. Then the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open, and Larson appeared, older now, hair thinned, eyes weary but calculating. For a moment he looked like a man about to protest. But then he saw the wall of law enforcement in front of him, and his face drained of color. He was cuffed without incident. As they read him his rights, neighbors peeked through curtains, whispering. For years Larson had blended into the background of their lives. Now the truth stood exposed. At headquarters, Larson sat in a windowless interrogation room. A single table, 2 chairs, a clock that ticked mercilessly on the wall. Across from him sat Detective Riley, the man who had carried Katie's case through the cold years. Riley studied Larson, silent at first, letting the weight of the moment settle. When he finally spoke, it was measured, steady. "We know you were with Katie that night. We have your DNA. It steps over, Michael." Larson shifted, his hands clasped tightly. At first he denied. He muttered about mistakes, contamination, anything to buy himself ground. But detectives pressed. They laid out the evidence, piece by piece, the coat fibers, the phone records, the timeline he could no longer bend to his will. Hours passed. The room grew thick with silence, broken only by the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers. Detectives pushed harder. One leaned in close. "You 7 carrying this for 20 years. Aren't you tired?" And then, it cracked. Larson's shoulders sagged. His voice, low at first, almost inaudible, stumbled into words they had waited decades to hear. He admitted he had offered Katie a ride that night. Admitted there had been an argument, that his temper had snapped. His version was fragmented, evasive in places, but the core truth spilled out. Katie had never left that car alive. For the detectives, it was both triumph and tragedy. The confession confirmed what they long suspected, but hearing it spoken was a wound reopened. Riley sat in silence, the enormity of the moment washing over him. After 2 decades of shadows, the truth finally had a voice. But justice was only beginning. Next would come the trial, the courtroom, the family's grief laid bare, and a town forced to relive its darkest night. The trial of Michael Larson became the event that consumed the town of Iron River. For 2 decades, Katie's name had been spoken in whispers, her absence a wound that never closed. Now, in the cold light of the courthouse, the community would finally face the man accused of stealing her life. The courtroom was small, with wood-paneled walls and worn benches that creaked under the weight of those who came to witness history. Reporters lined the back row, notebooks ready, cameras waiting outside. At the front sat Katie's family, her mother, her father, her siblings, faces aged by grief, etched with lines carved not by time alone, but by 20 years of waiting for this moment. When Larson entered, shackled, the room seemed to contract. He looked diminished, stripped of the quiet anonymity that had sheltered him for so long. No longer just a neighbor or a man who blended into the background. Now he was the accused, standing in the glare of justice. The prosecution presented the case with surgical precision. Jurors were shown the forensic evidence, the DNA match, the phone records. They listened to detectives describe how the investigation had unfolded, how every path had circled back to Larson. And then came his own words, the taped confession, played aloud. His voice filled the courtroom, flat and unremarkable, yet heavy with implication. The silence that followed was unbearable. Katie's mother testified, her voice breaking as she described the years of not knowing. Birthdays passed without her daughter, Christmas mornings with an empty chair. She held up one of Katie's childhood photos, bright smile, shining eyes, and told the jury, "This is who she was before he took her from us." Tears rippled across the benches, even the bailiff looked away. The defense tried to cast doubt, suggesting Larson's confession was coerced, that memories fade after so long, but the evidence was relentless. Piece by piece, the puzzle had been assembled and the picture was clear. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the room. 12 solemn faces carried the weight of 20 years. The verdict was read, guilty, guilty of murder in the first degree. The gavel struck, sharp and final. Katie's mother wept openly, clutching the hands of her family. Detective Riley sat quietly, a long exhale escaping him, an exhale he had been holding for half his life. Around the town, church bells rang, and neighbors who had lived under a cloud of suspicion for decades finally felt a measure of release. Justice had come, but it was not simple. Relief mingled with sorrow, closure with pain. For Katie's family, the truth was a gift and a burden, a resolution that could never bring her back. Still, the community knew the case that haunted their winters was finally over. But the snow remembers, and echoes remain. Winter returned to Iron River with the same quiet inevitability it always had. Snow blanketed the streets, muffling the sounds of cars, footsteps, and conversations. Yet beneath the pristine surface, the town carried the weight of what had happened 20 years ago, a scar that would never fully fade. Katie Jensen's story, once frozen in silence, had finally been told. Her family began the slow, painful work of moving forward. Her mother visited her daughter's grave with a bittersweet sense of closure, laying flowers that wilted under frost but remained a testament to enduring love. Her father returned to his routines, quieter now, but lighter in the knowledge that justice had been served. Siblings shared stories, laughing softly through tears, reclaiming fragments of a childhood stolen too soon. Detective Riley reflected on the case from his office window. The white expanse of Iron River stretched before him. 2 decades of obsession, of following threads and whispers, had led to truth. Yet he knew that no confession, no trial could return the years lost, the moments stolen. Still, he felt the quiet satisfaction of persistence rewarded, of a promise kept. Her story mattered, he whispered, even if it took all this time. The town itself seemed to breathe again. Taverns and diners regained a sense of warmth. Neighbors smiled at one another without suspicion shadowing every glance. Yet the memory lingered. Footprints that had disappeared into snow, lives altered by fear, and a community forced to confront its vulnerabilities. Children played in streets once deemed too dangerous, while parents remembered quietly the lessons learned in the long winters of doubt. The case became a cautionary tale, taught in briefings and classrooms about the power of persistence, the evolution of science, and the courage it takes to never let go. The files, now archived digitally, served as a reminder that no disappearance is ever truly beyond reach, no shadow ever permanent. And still the snow fell each winter, blanketing roads and woods alike, as if concealing the past in its pristine silence. Yet Katie's story carried on, not in whispers but in the hard-earned truth her family finally held. The footprints that ended abruptly on that frozen January night no longer marked a mystery unsolved. They had led after years to justice. Iron River remembered. Her story endured. Time had stolen 2 decades, but it could not erase the truth. Her footprints may have ended in the snow that night, but her story carried on until truth was found.